Hello, and you're listening to Your Majesty's Secret Podcast. I like my podcast shaken, not stirred. Only on the Four-Eyed Radio Network. If you'd like to check out more shows, go to foureyedradio.com.
Bond. James Bond. Shaken, not stirred.
Utter one more syllable and I'll have you killed.
I thought Christmas only comes once a year.
For your eyes only, darling.
I never joke about my web 007.
For England, James?
Come in, Univex. James Bond here.
Am I going to have a problem with you, Bond?
Allow me to introduce myself.
You're that secret agent! That English secret agent from England!
No, you're cleverer than you look.
Still better than looking cleverer than you are.
My God, what's Bond doing?
I think he's attempting re-entry, sir.
007 reporting for duty.
Hello, the name's Berkeley, Ziggy Berkeley from Cinema on the Rocks. And with me is Eric Dewey from Socially Awkward Studios. And you are listening to Her Majesty's Secret Podcast, only on the Four-Eyed Radio Network. That's right, this is the show where we talk about bondage, James Bondage. And today we're going to be talking about sequels to Ian Fleming novels that were written by other people.
Oh, yeah. If that doesn't make any sense to you, trust me, you're not alone. At first, I was like, wait, what? But it makes sense now. It makes sense now that we figured it out, and I was like, oh, okay. Totally understand what you mean now. Yeah, these are books that are actually direct sequels to books that Ian Fleming had written himself, but obviously did not get around to the sequel.
Yes. And we'd also like to say Happy New Year to everyone. Hopefully you have gotten over your vodka martini, shaken not stirred hangovers. I'm pretty sure I have, but I won't tell you whether... Well, no, I'm pretty sure I have. Eric, how about yourself?
We'll see. We'll see. If I have to take a pause in the middle to run to the restroom, no, I'm usually pretty smart about my drinking as far as knowing my limits, so I don't tend to get too bad at hangovers. I should be all right.
Yeah. No, I actually tend to avoid hangovers, and one of the secrets to avoiding a hangover, of course, is to drink quality liquor.
Yes, indeed.
I mean, can't stress that enough, quality liquor.
Oh, yeah.
And if you are the type who does New Year's champagne, I am, of course, the type to do New Year's champagne myself, though it is not always champagne, because, of course, champagne has to be from the Champagne region of France.
Sparkling wine.
Yes, sparkling wine. I found that German sect was very good when I tried that. Had one from Spain a couple years ago that was just awful. It was like the bread you feed a pigeon. It just was not good. But usually I have very good luck with it. Just the one thing to remember is if you drink the entire bottle by yourself, don't even think about getting up. You just lie back and you go sleep. Don't get up. Now, I do have a fun story about champagne to start us off for the new year.
Champagne.
Once upon a time, I was going into the wine store and I was trying to make my New Year's selection for champagne and looked around and just since it wasn't very busy, I asked the person by the counter, do you have any recommendations? And my range is X. She said, really? Well, I do have something exactly at that price because somebody pre-ordered it. They made it's normally 4 times as much as your budget. However, they made a 75% deposit and have not come to pick it up. They were supposed to pick it up by last week. So now it's up for sale for the remainder of the deposit. I'm like, really? Yes. And what is this? Chateau de Marquis de Sade.
Ooh.
And yes, it is from the family of that Marquis de Sade.
That Marquis de Sade. There's so many of them that you have to be watching out for.
Well, everyone does.
Oh, you meant that Marquis de Sade. Okay, all right. I thought you were talking about Marquis de Sade. Yeah, that guy's
and the
just
Funky Bunch.
That guy's just a crack up, man. He'll tell you jokes.
But that is actually some very damn delicious champagne, let me tell you. And I knew better than to get up from the couch after just saying.
I can imagine. Yeah, I've only been really drunk on champagne once in my life, and that was when we went to Vegas, my wife and I, one time, and we hit up the Mirage for their Sunday champagne brunch. And let me tell you...
Brunch, and you got real drunk. Okay.
We walked out of there just before noon, and I was hammered. kept that champagne flowing quite nicely throughout the entirety of the meal. It was fantastic. Like, I couldn't, she was drinking mimosas, and they kept coming by with the orange juice and the champagne for her as well. Even though she wasn't drinking it nearly as quickly as I was. My glass never actually became empty. Technically, I only had one glass of champagne. Well, as far as I'm concerned, that's the story I'm going to tell.
Let's be fair. You're about 3 times as big as your wife. By volume. I mean, let's be honest.
By volume. Yeah. So yeah, it was a fun afternoon. Let me tell you what. Luckily, the one good thing about getting smashed that early in the day is that I didn't really have to worry about a hangover, because by the time I did go to bed that night, I had definitely sobered up. That's the other secret to not having a hangover. Don't go to bed spinning drunk. Stay up if you have to. Drink water, Gatorade, whatever you need to do to keep yourself going. But yeah, definitely don't go to bed with if the room is spinning, don't go to sleep just yet.
And of course, the other tip to avoid those things altogether, along with quality liquor, eat while you drink.
Yeah, that kind of ruins the buzz, though.
You don't drink professionally enough, then.
Drinking on an empty stomach gets you there faster and cheaper. Does get you that hangover, though.
Yes, but you've seen the culture I grew up in now, so...
That is true. That is very true.
But with that said, let's go on to some more literary culture. But hey, let's face it, Ian Fleming and James Bond are all about that booze just as much. So...
Absolutely, yeah. So we're going to go ahead and tackle them, not necessarily in the order in which they were published, but in chronological order of the books they follow.
Yes, which means that we are actually going to be starting with the most recently published of the books that we're going to be talking about. Just came out this past fall.
Yep.
And that would be Trigger Mortis, written by Anthony Horowitz. And this is a direct sequel to Goldfinger, which, as you may remember, was one of my least favorite Ian Fleming novels.
That golf scene, though. Holy moly. I think that golf scene is still going on. I think I'm still reading that golf scene.
I think I am, too. In fact, every time you pass a driving range, it reminds you, oh, I'm still reading that.
Oh, geez. I'm going to a driving range tomorrow, so that ought to be fun. Yeah. I'll just be thinking about Goldfinger the entire time.
Now, one thing that I'd like to start off, it's just a little bit of controversy that happened just before the book was published.
Convenient timing, no?
Oh, yeah. And how did that happen? Well, it was because Anthony Horowitz gave an interview. And, of course, he was asked what everyone associated with James Bond has been asked, especially as we were leading up to the premiere of Spectre, which we were at that time. And he was asked about, who might replace Daniel Craig as James Bond on the big screen, and a name that was floated out in front of him was Idris Elba. Mm-hmm. And his reply was, he's too street.
Which, of course, everybody assumed meant too black.
Yes. And he went on to clarify that, no, he didn't mean it that way. He was thinking of his performance in the TV series Luther, where he plays a street detective. And so just more of the gritty detective cop type. That was at least his story that he decided to stick to afterwards. I am not going to make any value judgments on it myself. I will personally be willing to give someone the benefit of the doubt. But it was just interesting little tempest in a teacup.
Yeah, people made a huge deal about this, like he was the most racist person on the planet to suggest that an actor might be too street in his terms, just because, everybody was making the assumption that he meant he was too black for it, that he didn't want a black Bond. I read some of his comments after the fact when he came back and said, no, this is what I meant by it. And while I understand, I'll take the whole race thing out of it completely. I will go ahead and take Horowitz at his word that it had nothing to do with the color of his skin at all, that he was literally just talking about his demeanor and his ruggedness. And I will go ahead and say that I completely disagree with Anthony Horowitz on this point. I think that Daniel Craig is pretty street when you come down to it. The fact that he can clean up nicely is what makes him a great Bond.
And Sean Connery, same thing.
Yeah, Sean Connery can be street. We've mostly seen the cleaned up version of Connery.
But if you look back when he was first cast.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. He was definitely a more rugged individual, to be certain. So, Yeah, I completely disagree with his thought process here. Just even completely taking the race situation out of it, which I don't have a problem with personally at all. I don't think there's any reason there couldn't be a black James Bond. I think the character,
we will be discussing this in a future episode.
As long as they're British, I think we're good to go, or at least can be British convincingly. As long as they can play the part. And I from what I've seen of Idris Elba, I believe him to be a competent actor. And I think we've seen him cleaned up nice, and we've seen him rugged. So I think he could be both sides of the coin and be a good Bond.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, even in roles that don't necessarily require that, I remember when I first wrote my review of Pacific Rim, I remember commenting that looking at how he plays his character there, because he's supposed to be the mentor to these people who are piloting these gigantic robots to face off with these 25-story tall alien monsters. Fantastic movie, by the way. I mean, really, really good. Watch it on the biggest screen that you can, though. That was one of those where you would definitely get the best experience in a theater, because these things are supposed to be that much bigger than you, and you really want to convey that. So watching it on your phone probably isn't going to do it, but find yourself a nice 40-inch plus TV. You should be good to go. But no, his character in that movie, I remember I wrote in my review afterwards that he sounds like he's bucking to play the President of the United States or the Prime Minister of Great Britain, because he's just delivering these lofty, inspirational speeches. So, yeah, he can totally do the not street side of things, really. And he went on to go for Nelson Mandela, I believe. So, I mean, he's fine.
So you're saying there's a chance. I read you.
Yeah, so I got no problem with Mr. Elba.
Yeah, no, I agree completely with you. I don't believe that there is an actor that's too street to play Bond, because I believe Bond to be a somewhat street character sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. So that's what's, as long as they can clean up nice. And I don't know, that's the thing about cleaning up is you suddenly see people in a totally different light, and you're like, oh, wow, they clean up nice. So unless they absolutely do not clean up nice, I'm good to go with it.
Yeah, and for cleaning up nice, it's just because this is Bond. Mr. Tux, Mr. Dinner Jackets, and this is one of the latter.
Exactly.
You have to clean up nice.
Exactly. And, when I first heard of Daniel Craig announced as Bond, that was one of the things that was thrown about, people were very upset that there could be a blonde Bond, but they were also very upset that there could be an ugly Bond. I heard that quite a bit, and I'm looking at him like, all right, I don't, I guess I don't see the traditional attractiveness that some people have. I wouldn't necessarily go to call him ugly, but he certainly does clean up nice, and he pulls it off. So I don't see any problem with it whatsoever.
Indeed. And then there was the other thing, the more positive spin they were trying to put when Mr. Horowitz came out with his novel in the fall, and that was that it is inclusive of original material by Ian Fleming. Now, what was your take on this? I felt that they pushed that a little too hard.
I don't know if it would be considered a spoiler or not. I mean, we typically, give the caveat that yes, we do spoil these books a bit.
I think we kind of have to here.
But there is something that I did not, I went into this book thinking, okay, it said original material by Ian Fleming. And so I was thinking, okay, maybe it was an outline, maybe it was some additional information, not exactly sure what else might be going on in here, but, I was expecting something more akin to, there was a book called, I believe the title was Poodle Springs, that was about half written by Raymond Chandler before he died, and then half written by another author to finish it before release. And you could tell.
Oh, you mean like some people think happened with the man with the golden gun?
Exactly. Except this is well known to exactly be the thing of it. That book, there was a definite shift. As much as they tried to indicate that he's writing in the style of Raymond Chandler, there was a definite shift. You could tell. If you were reading the book, there was a definite tone shift where it was like, okay, a different person is writing this book now. I didn't feel that while I was reading this book. I never found that tone shift. And then I read the acknowledgments at the end, and I figured out why I never felt that tone shift. I'm looking for, I've actually got the book in front of me here, and I'm trying to find the exact point where they specify how much content was actually contributed by Ian Fleming in this
About
book.
500 words.
That's what they said. They said between 400 and 500 words total. That's it, out of the entire book. So we're talking most likely an outline.
And what's more is it's based on what he says happens in the acknowledgments is that when he was given the opportunity, because you don't just say, I want to write a James Bond book. No, this is one of those where the Fleming estate invites you to write one. That's how these things go. And what they did in the case of Mr. Horowitz is they invited him to write one, and they said, we have 5 unpublished Ian Fleming stories, which were originally written as treatments for CBS television episodes, because, as you may remember, the first thing he tried to do was sell to CBS television, and that's how we got Cards on.
Climax! The title of the series was the most Bond thing about that entire thing.
Very messy, but anyway.
They can be.
They offered him the chance to pick from one of these stories, and he picked one. And so he used that as the basis for Trigger Mortis. Now, the thing is, the title of that particular story that he chose is used as the chapter title for chapter, I believe it is chapter 007.
Oh.
In this particular book. And that story is called Murder on Wheels. So what would the logical mind think? Chapter 7, Murder on Wheels, is the original material by Ian Fleming. Read the acknowledgments. Nope, that's not it. They just put the title there. No, the premise of what happens in that chapter is there, but the words that he uses are actually from an earlier conversation in the book with Bill Tanner and M. So he says that's where the majority of the material is. Now, can we prove this, that nothing shows up outside of that scene? Not necessarily, even though if you do a count, 400 words does not take very long. Trust me, if I'm at 400 words in a movie review, I am less than halfway through. So yeah, it's a very short amount of material.
It really is.
But what they don't include in the book, and this disappoints me, though I kind of understand why, because I can see where the Fleming estate wants to go with this. They don't include the actual untouched original Ian Fleming story in the book as a supplement. So you never get to see it. So you never get to do the comparison.
Right.
That bothers me. I think it should have been included.
Absolutely, yeah. That would have been a nice little touch at least. Even if it was just something like what I would have done, I think, instead of including it in the book necessarily, maybe in the acknowledgments have a special web address that's not publicly listed or something like that, where you could go to and read the original. If that way you avoid the thing of people just jumping to the back of the book and immediately grabbing that. A little bit anyway. Some people still will, but
they have to
I would accept
the book
that
first.
Yeah, exactly. So. I would accept that. And granted, that wouldn't stay secret for long. People would spread the link around, and So I guess but it no more so than they do with the full books now. I mean, it's possible to get the entire book, downloaded from alternative sources, within days, if not sooner, of its
release in any kind of Chinese.
Within any kind of digital release, you're gonna have that. So you can't just use that as an excuse not to do it at all. But yeah, it would have been nice to see the original material, and especially I would have loved to read it, like you said, after the fact, to kind of compare and think, okay, I see where he got this from, or I see where he got this from, and I see where he completely went off on his own tangent over here and did this own thing.
Yeah, my suspicion is that the estate wants to hold on to all of these original stories so it still has something of Fleming himself to publish in the future. But, of course, can't prove that, but if you follow the money, it makes the most sense to me.
Yeah, no, I completely agree that it's very possible that we'll see in the very near future some sort of compilation, if you will, of these additional works. They're probably just figuring out how they can sell it, or how they can, not how they can sell it, but how they can package it to be something new and unique while still being able to get around everything else, I guess.
Now, in terms of what you were saying earlier about the tone shift not being there, I will say that Horowitz, and in fact, 2 out of the 3 of our authors in total, and one of them comes close, but 2 really nail it, gets the tone of how Ian Fleming writes, so that it does kind of feel like Ian Fleming, but not in the good way. Because when I look at many of these authors, I think the only one I didn't get this feeling about in terms of the ones who were really trying to go for Fleming's style we talked about this book already, was a solo by William Boyd. I thought he got Fleming's tone, but didn't go so heavy on what I think this author and our other authors have done for this episode, and that's, oh, I get to write as Ian Fleming. This means I can throw any and all social decency out the window. I can say bad things about gay people. I can be a misogynist, a racist pig, and I can get away with it because I can say, hey, I'm writing as Ian Fleming. I got that out of this book.
Yeah, absolutely. That was one thing that, originally when I was first reading it, like I said, I didn't sense the tone shift during the book, but I did get that feeling. I was like, okay, if this isn't a majority of Ian Fleming's writing, then it definitely does have, somebody is making a very big point to get this theme, if you will. But really just the worst of what Ian Fleming did. Obviously we love Fleming's work. We love what he's given us in the characters, but we've talked about in the past how the writing itself was not always the strongest, especially when we're dealing with any kind of female characters, especially when we're dealing with any kind of race relations or anything like that. There were some times when it was definitely very rough.
And the thing, when I'm reading Ian Fleming himself, I understand when the book was written. It was written in the 50s or the early 60s. And I take that historical context into account. And I can appreciate art history for the era in which it was originated. This is why, even though H.P. Lovecraft is an even bigger racist and sexist pig, I can read the stories of H.P. Lovecraft just fine, because I know when they were written. Same with Robert Howard, the person who wrote the Conan stories, or Edgar Rice Burroughs, who wrote Tarzan and who wrote John Carter of Mars. I mean, these are all hideously racist, sexist books, but I take them in the context of their time. I understand it. I let those things go. This book was published in 2015. I know he was writing as Ian Fleming. However, William Boyd did it and didn't make me feel like I needed to take a shower. Yeah. So, maybe just a little. And the thing is that I won't even say that Horowitz was the worst about it, but it's there. And it feels worse to me because it feels like he's trying to do it. That this is one of his hooks for how I can be Fleming, is to bring out the worst in him. And so I think part of what makes it hard for me to read this is that I know he is trying too hard to do this deliberately.
Yeah, I did get that sense as well. It's almost as if he knew better, but somehow either didn't care or specifically went against his better nature to write things that he felt that Fleming might have written. Where when Fleming wrote it, it was just product of his time and his, who he was. Whereas this, it seems like a deliberate attempt to take it back to that time, and it doesn't work out very well. I think we see a lot of things that are just completely unnecessary and just kind of written off as, okay, well, it's Fleming-like, I guess, but it's not really.
Speaking of completely unnecessary, we then have the other hook to this story, which is, it's a direct sequel to Goldfinger. Did you think that anything that related to Goldfinger needed to be here?
Absolutely not. The big selling point, one of the big selling points of this book was the fact that Pussy Galore is back.
Yes, we have Pussy Galore. I forgot to warn everyone at the start of this episode, it does contain Pussy Galore.
It is galore full of pussy galore. But the book is not. Pussy Galore is in the book near the beginning, and she's not even in the same space as Bond. It's more of an afterthought. Oh yeah, this character that we mentioned before happens to be here. And about halfway through, they re-mention the fact, he briefly thinks about her. That's it.
Specifically, briefly thinks about dumping her.
Yeah, he's like, oh wait, is Pussy Galore still back at my place where I'm not? Yeah, well, she is when I get there. I'm going to have to kick her out, I guess. That's basically what it amounts to. She is completely unnecessary to the story. She does not play any major part in any way, shape, or form, not even in shaping Bond's actions. It's not even a matter of her absence in the actual story, because people can be absent from a story and still drive the story because of, for motivation factor or something, but she does not do that. There is so little mention of her, and the time she is mentioned, the time she is in there, she very much feels shoehorned in. It's like, oh, I've got this character, I'm required to put her in this story, so here goes. Here she is. It does not feel natural at all.
And as a result, we waste about a quarter to a third of the book. And it's basically, here's how it goes. We find out that this takes place right after Goldfinger. I mean, right after Goldfinger. And because Pussy Galore is afraid that the mobsters who were left after Good Guy Goldfinger killed as many mobsters as possible, because Good Guy Goldfinger, she figures that she's going to get blamed in part for the fiasco that happened at Fort Knox. So she goes with Bond to Britain so that she can escape the heat from, quote-unquote, the machine. And, they have their fling for a couple of weeks, and then Bond starts to get tired of her, because he's Bond. Specifically, he's Ian Fleming's Bond. So, he's the worst of Bond in terms of his ability to relate to women. And we find out that he's thinking of dumping her. She's getting kind of bored with him, goes on shopping trips while he's off at work. And he even gets, not quite fully officially, but almost ordered by M to kick her ass out onto the curb. Because she's also drawing heat from the CIA, who think, she was a criminal. We should be arresting her. Why didn't we arrest her before? Let's arrest her.
Why didn't we do this before?
So there's this thought that, she just needs to be kicked to the curb. Meanwhile, she's getting bored. And Bond's thinking of kicking her out when he then gets this assignment from M. And the assignment that he has is Smersh. Yes, our good old friend Smersh, because this is an Ian Fleming Bond story, remember? Are plotting to kill a British race car driver so that they can demonstrate the superiority of Soviet race cars, as one does.
Of course.
Now,
this is Smersh thinking, of course. I mean, totally right in line with what Smersh would do.
The thing is, this isn't entirely out of line with Soviet thinking in this part of the Cold War, as proven by history. That they were looking to show that their way was superior to everything, but it's maybe taking it just a little bit far. But it's not off base to the point of I can't suspend my disbelief. I can. For this, I can.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so he is assigned to go to a crash course in learning how to drive a race car, and he's going to leave Pussy Galore behind. But she decides that she's going to go visit him. Possibly to dump him while he's up there. Unfortunately, she gets kidnapped. And it turns out she gets kidnapped by the agents of Goldfinger.
Oh.
Yes, his remaining living hench people. And what do? I literally cringed when I found out what they were doing. Because, let's face it, it's the one thing which from the time the book came out, the time the movie was released, has been the one major complaint about Goldfinger. Even though it led to one of the most iconic images in the movie, we still all acknowledge that the science behind if you paint someone entirely gold, they will die of skin suffocation.
Wait, that doesn't happen? What are you talking about?
The science on that is bullshit. It was wrong in the 60s. It's wrong now. Everybody knew it was wrong. The only way you're going to have somebody die of suffocation by painting them is if you also paint their mouth and nostrils shut. So, no. And what does he do in this story? He pretends that we don't know this because Goldfinger's henchmen decide to take her out to this backwoods clearing in Britain, strip her naked. Of course, we have to have naked Pussy Galore. And right. They paint her gold. And she starts to die from being painted gold.
As one does, evidently.
And Bond has to save her. And I'm cringing the entire time. I remember actually when I read that scene, I was eating a pizza. I dropped my piece of pizza back onto my plate. I'm like, you've got to kid me. It's just, really? Really?
It's bad. It's just not good.
And then, just because we also want to get back to something else from Goldfinger, which Ian Fleming did that was... Now, this is kind of correcting Ian Fleming's mistake, but on the other hand, it's just, haven't we gone far enough already, ruining everything? Bond's race car instructor that he was going to visit is, of course, a woman. And, it looks like they might be about to get it on, but it doesn't quite happen. Well, after Bond rescues Pussy Galore, gets her treated, next thing he finds out, Pussy Galore decides, you know what? I am still a lesbian. And the race car driving instructor says, you know what? I think I am
Me too!
So, yeah, this happened really, really fast, but I'm going back to America with Pussy, so see ya!
And we're like, as bad as this storyline is, we're actually glad to see it happen because we don't want either of these characters to be in the story anymore.
Not only that, but the idea of you can unturn gay at the drop of a hat is just stupid.
And then
so on the one hand, you're
back,
correcting
and
something.
you're
On the
like-
other hand, you didn't need to bring it back this far to begin with.
Exactly. Yeah. That whole part again. It just was totally unnecessary for Pussy Galore to exist in this book. She did not drive any part of the story that was actually necessary. It was all superficial. It was all superfluous. It was all unnecessary that she was in this book in any way, shape, or form. And I believe that she was only in this book so that you could say, "Hey, look, this is a sequel to Goldfinger." You can tell because look, Pussy Galore's here. Without that, it could have been any Bond story. And you know what? That's fine. That's A-okay. A lot of serial books with one main character who goes from book to book to book are written in such a way that any one of the books could be your first book. And it's
you
fine.
mean like most of the James Bond movies before Daniel Craig?
Exactly. Or the Bond novels themselves, even, with the exception maybe of the Blofeld trilogy. I mean, any of them you could theoretically pick up and just read. And yes, it will throw back to the original books. I recently had this happen. I discovered a book that I had not heard about previously. It was like a free read trial thing on my Amazon, or I forget how I came across it, but I started to read it because the idea sounded interesting. And I was about halfway through, and I thought, oh, wow, this is really good. I wonder if there's any more of these books. And I checked into it, and sure enough, there are 2 more books by this same author of this same character, and I'm reading the third of 3. And you know what? It was perfectly fine. And now I'm going back and reading the first 2 because it was good, and I want to know how it got to that point. But I was able to enjoy that first book, even though it was the third book of the series, without any problem whatsoever. And it didn't need to be force-fed to me that, oh, by the way, you have to read these other books or you won't get this.
Yeah, so this was really unnecessary, the way that this was done. And I honestly felt like I kind of wasted my time for this whole first act of the book. Now, to be fair, Ian Fleming did the same thing with some of his writing.
Yes.
However, and this is the key, and this is where Horowitz doesn't do it as well as Fleming. When Fleming did it, I didn't mind, except for the golf scene. But I mean, that really doesn't count.
Nobody liked the golf scene.
But when Fleming tells you a third of a book that you could really probably have just thrown out and the rest of the book would just be fine, it's still okay because he's still telling a thrilling, interesting story that you don't feel like you're getting cheated on, and he brings you into a world. Whereas with this one, now in part because we know it's a setup, it feels like we're being cheated. And I think this is an attempt at using Fleming's style that totally backfires. So, yeah, it just didn't work all around, this inclusion of Pussy Galore and sequel to Goldfinger stuff.
Yeah, and by itself, the basic plot of this book had an interesting idea. The actual plot of this book had very good Bondinessosity, I felt. It was just on the cusp of being ridiculous while still being just within that range of slightly plausible, just enough. Like, it's absolutely ridiculous. Utterly, for sure. But just this side of plausible to where you're like, okay, I could maybe understand why the characters would think that this would work. And it was just enough that you can get that sense. But that was it. And then it was done.
Yeah, so the Goldfinger sequel aspect and the let's make Bond as disagreeable a character as possible aspect. Basically, the let's try to write as Ian Fleming aspect, while I think he nailed it, he nailed the worst of it.
Yeah.
And so, this just didn't work for me.
I agree. I did not find this book to be thoroughly enjoyable. It wasn't awful. Like, I won't say that no one should ever read this book ever. I won't go that far. If you're a Bond fan, especially if you're a completist such as we are, then you will find enjoyment in this book. However, I don't know if it's enough. I really don't, because it's rough. It's got some serious problems.
It really, really does. And now, if you're wondering what the rest of this story is actually about, I honestly think the best part was the prologue. And that is where we find out we have the starting thing where we find out that somebody who works at a military base is being paid off to do some kind of sabotage thing. Never quite specified, but you get a pretty decent idea of where this is going to go. And he takes his payoff, and of course, he is a German immigrant because that's what happens, because he can't trust those Operation Paperclip people. So he takes his payoff, and he goes home, and we find out that he got himself a young trophy wife who was, of course, younger than he was, sexy body, just thought he might be exciting as his foreigner, and she likes his money, but she's kind of bored with him now, so when he comes back with the big suitcase full of cash, she kills him and runs off with the money and burns the house down. I dug that.
As one does.
That's a thoroughly modern thing, but I thought that was okay. I liked that. But, of course, that part also ends up going nowhere, which led to my other favorite part because I thought it was a neat Diamonds Are Forever reference when we find out what she does with herself. Which is she goes to Vegas.
Yeah.
But
of course.
Jumps off a balcony, except there's no swimming pool.
Oh, oops. Yeah, like I said, the base plot of this is actually fairly interesting. It's got some good elements. It's got some bondinessosity to it. I think the execution is really where it lagged. I mean, like we said, you can completely take Pussy Galore out of this book. You can take every scene with her in it and literally just remove them without changing the story at all. And that's a clear sign that she's unnecessary in the story, obviously. It's just bad. It really is.
Yeah. And it could have been good. It could have been. But it just doesn't, because as Ian Fleming does, and therefore Horowitz tries to do, the whole racing thing, again, feels like kind of a waste, even though we come back to it, because it's just a means of introducing us to our ultimate villain, who is doing the racing thing as a side thing for Smersh, because he's really got this other big plan that has to do with, sabotaging the rocket, like Dr. No, except not Dr. No, because no, this is another Asian man. Jason Sin.
Is it a secret Asian man?
Secret Asian man? Secret? Anyway.
Indie.
That is an often misheard lyric, But it doesn't work. The villain himself ends up, and he has a great gimmick. His gimmick is, if you cross him, he has a deck of cards.
Oh, yeah.
And most of the things on the deck of cards are different ways that he's going to kill you, except for 4 of the cards that are get out of getting killed free cards. So that's an interesting gimmick.
It's like deuces are wild.
Yeah, but of course, if you draw one of the get out of getting killed free cards, he says you cheated and makes you draw again. But
we only ever saw that happen one time, and that was after Bond had specifically made him show him all the cards to prove that these blank cards were there. And then, of course, he was able to immediately memorize the position of said card and then pick it out after a re-spread of them.
Yeah.
That whole bit of him, especially since Sin does just say, oh, well, you cheated, so draw again anyway, or I'll draw for you. It was so totally unnecessary, and it was so unbelievable. It was so ridiculously unbelievable that it took away from what could have been a very dramatic moment. We do end up with Bond having to suffer the fate of one of the cards. So the whole thing of supposedly we're going to show how cool and smart Bond is because he's able to identify the placement of a single card in the deck after it's been flipped over. No. It was completely unnecessary, and it was one of those examples of them just trying to be like, hey, look how cool this guy is. And it was unnecessary.
And the other thing about it as well is it bothered me that you find out that the fate that Bond is chosen for, he finds out later that between 2 and half a dozen other guys suffered the same fate. Out of a 48-card draw, because we're taking, the 4 free cards out. How likely is it that somebody draws the same one that often? I mean, in order for that to happen, this villain will have to have done this at this specific location to over 300 people. And this is in America in the 50s. I think someone would notice. I'm just saying.
You'd think. You really would. But yeah, it doesn't just border on ridiculous. It is utterly ridiculous. Now, the only, you could look at that and say, oh my gosh, he must have killed thousands of people in order for that many of them to have suffered that specific fate. And, maybe it's just like they want to show us how awesome Bond is by being able to find the cards blank in the first place. They also want to show us how bad the villain is by how many people he might have killed this way. It's tired, and it's completely unnecessary is what it is. And it just ends up stretching the realm of credibility to the point of breaking well past, as a matter of fact. So you're just left going, ugh, really? That's where you're going with this?
The other good part about this, I thought, was when the villain reveals his backstory. His backstory is interesting. It's steeped in the history of the Korean War, and in fact, in one of the more atrocious things that happened during the Korean War, which you can either call it an atrocity or an accident. Either way, it was not good if you were one of the people under the bombs. So he's got some flavor in his backstory, but the kicker is, after that, his whole personality shut off. Like he sleeps on an iron bed with no creature comforts. It's like he's in a prison cell. And he has no personality whatsoever. He just doesn't care about anything.
Oh, he does have a personality. He has the personality of Beast from the Disney Beauty and the Beast, where he scratches all the paintings and he basically does everything that the Beast does, except you don't end up finding him to be lovable in the end.
See, I wouldn't agree with that, because the Beast, at least, he'd sing every so often.
I'm really glad that he didn't make him sing.
I mean, whereas this guy, he literally, and this is his selling point, is nothing. He's dead inside. He's a corpse. He's not interesting. He's very boring and just yuck.
He really is. The character is not good. That's what it comes down to, and it's sad to say this, but it's true. The character is just not good. We do not like this character, and it's not. It had potential to be good. That's the thing. That's what really stinks, is that it did have the potential to be so much better than it ended up being. But again, it suffers from that. And I believe that Anthony Horowitz is probably a better writer than this. I haven't read personally anything else that he's done myself. I'm willing to give it a try to find out if I'm right, because I do believe that he's probably better than this. But he does not show it in this book.
I would like to think that he is. I'm not sure that I'd be willing to give it a try. I just can't. I don't know. I'd have to be really drawn in by whatever plot is written on the blurb. And then we have the other best thing about the book, kinda, is the name of the girl, Jeopardy Lane. Enjoy that, because it's the best thing about her, at least for me. How about for you?
She's not a particularly well drawn character. In the tradition of Ian Fleming, the female character is not particularly well done. I mean, I can't say that I was surprised by that. Even from the very beginning of the book, it really felt like it was going to have that. I didn't feel that he didn't even make an attempt to add anything to Pussy Galore's character. In fact, if anything, I think Pussy suffered at the hands of Horowitz in this case. Not a strong character, not memorable, not anything that nothing to write home about.
And I think that her twist, quote unquote, was entirely predictable. I mean, it was just a matter of which alphabet soup it was going to be. I mean, I thought it was a very predictable twist, and I was especially not impressed with how things ended with her. Because on the one hand, yes, it's exactly how Bond wants it to end with all of his women, but it's just, again, we're going to the worst of Ian Fleming, where the only way the sex works for Bond is if it's got the sweet tang of rape, to quote Fleming from Casino Royale. Because when the sex scene comes up, she's stiff and unresponsive until finally she says, "Oh, do what the hell you want." And then suddenly she's free and the sex is good. Come on, man. Did we have to go there? I mean, really? I mean, this is going to sound gross to some people, perhaps. Maybe, maybe not. I honestly would be floored if a writer dared to admit that Bond ever went down on a woman. I mean, just like, what? He thought of her pleasure? What? Just like, maybe I went too far with that, but it's just...
I was just letting the sweet silence can tell the story on that one. I was like, okay. You get on with your bad self over there.
But no, I'm just saying, it's like the woman has to decide that, okay, I'm just going to let Bond rape me now. That we don't need that. And we've seen other writers take on the character of Bond where they didn't have to do that. And it disappointed me that we had to go back there for this. The only good part about that sequence was the lead up where Bond is walking into the Waldorf Astoria Hotel and he's thinking, how many chandeliers does a place need? It's the total opposite of Daniel Craig in Quantum of Solace, where if the place doesn't look like that, he's not staying there. Whereas this Bond, it's like, really? Do I need this? Where's a Motel 6?
Yeah, I got that sense, and that was one of the things that I didn't like. Like we've discussed before, the Bond that we enjoy is the one who, yes, his home and his office will be very plain. They'll be, respectable, and clean, but plain and subdued, very, very bland. Whereas when he is out, because that is where he lives, he is going to go for the best he can, whether it's food, whether it's drinks, whether it's women. He's going for the best he can get his hands on. So I don't like seeing a Bond where he'd rather be in a Motel 6 than in the fancy place that has too many chandeliers.
Yeah. So overall, my verdict on Trigger Mortis, I was excited when I heard it was coming out. I was happy to get myself a first edition hardcover. Really, I would have been fine with a paperback or heavily discounted ebook. It just, you read it because you're a Bond completist, but it's easily skippable, I think.
Absolutely. I don't think it adds anything to the canon that's absolutely necessary. Again, I think the plot itself is fairly interesting. You've got the space race going on. You've got the rockets. You've got this, these scientists, and you don't know, are they making a nuclear weapon? Are they doing this? What are they doing? You do have that intrigue, and the basic plot is there. It's just not fleshed out in a way that makes it a good read, and that's what's really disappointing about it.
Yeah. Now, that brings us up to the very first sequel to an Ian Fleming novel that was written by someone else. Rumor has it that this is the same person who may or may not have completed writing or editing or doing something to The Man with the Golden Gun, which may or may not have ever actually been completed by Ian Fleming before he died. Mm-hmm. As we mentioned when we discussed that novel, that one's all up for grabs. But so now we have the first direct sequel to an Ian Fleming novel written by someone else, and this is Colonel Sun, written by Kingsley Amis, running under the alias of Richard Markham.
Was it Robert Markham?
Yes, Robert. Okay. Sorry.
I was like, wait a minute.
Richard, yes. Robert. One of those common R names.
Yeah. Either way, it was fake, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
It was actually Kingsley Amis.
Yeah, so this is a direct sequel to The Man with the Golden Gun, and also has some pretty decent relevance to Spectre, as it turns out.
Indeed it does, which if you listen to our Spectre episode, you had mentioned that there was something from this book in Spectre. And I had not yet read this book. I hadn't done that part of my homework for this episode yet. And in fact, I ended up, I read this on the flight home from your place back home to my dreary existence here. I read this book, and when I got to that point, I was like, holy crap, it's almost word for word. In some places, it is word for word. It was updated only very slightly, a couple of little things tweaked here or there, but oh my gosh, they literally pulled a scene out of this book and threw it into Spectre without telling anybody, without mentioning it.
And literally without mentioning it, because nowhere in the credits, even in the special thank you acknowledgement section, is Kingsley Amis mentioned. I feel that that's kind of shady. I'm sure it's legal, just through licensing and such.
Yeah,
but
if they have the rights to it, then they can really kind of do as they please. But yeah, it's kind of surprising that they wouldn't at least acknowledge that they got some of the material, and especially because it was a great scene. It was a fantastic scene, and it was a great scene in this book as well as in Spectre. So, hey, give credit where credit is due, or let the fans do it for you is I guess where they're going with that, because that's what we're going to do.
Now, I think we have a difference of opinion on that scene.
Really?
But we'll get there. So what we have with the beginning of Colonel Sun is, of course, we had in The Man with the Golden Gun, for those who don't remember, we started off the book with Bond having been brainwashed by the Soviets, trying to kill M. But M, feeling sorry for him, decides to rehabilitate him, and instead of running him off to be a chicken farmer, which is exactly what James Bond thinks is going to happen to him, by the way. It's in the book that he's going to have to farm chickens. Because, of course, because of Blofeld, he loves chickens.
He loves all chickens.
Yes, and you love chickens.
Their flesh, their weird little feathers, all of it.
And, of course, we all know that the hipster chicken had to come before the egg. Because hipster chicken.
Oh, no. No.
But, anyways, in The Man with the Golden Gun, M decides he's going to send Bond on a rehab mission to try and kill Pistol Scaramanga. And if he survives this mission with his head still on his shoulders, then he'll be welcomed back into the fold. Well, here we are back into the fold. Except they don't quite know what to do with him. So Bond is still left doing basic office work. And he's bored. And he feels like he's losing his edge. And he's even considering the R word.
Retirement.
Oh no!
That's how it opens, and it sort of makes sense. I think it makes sense coming after Man with Golden Gun for him to be in that position, because yes, they sent him on this supposed rehab mission where everybody knew it was kind of like either he's going to be successful or he's going to be dead, and that's it. And I don't believe they really expected him to be successful.
And even then, he wasn't necessarily successful.
Right.
He had some options. I mean, he had some, not options, issues when he came back. And he didn't exactly come back entirely unscathed. So they kind of wonder what to do with him, and what they end up doing is they leave him sitting in the office, doing nothing, just kind of letting him go to pasture. Until, dun, 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 what happens, Eric?
Well, I believe someone tries to capture M and Bond, and they succeed, in fact, in capturing M, which is... I actually felt... I enjoyed this scene. I'm getting the sense that you didn't enjoy this book very much. And while I won't count this as one of my favorite books, or even one of my favorite Bond books... I will say that I actually did quite enjoy this read. I thought it was a quick read, yes. It was not mentally challenging. I won't give it that. It never made me think, really. But I didn't, unlike with Trigger Mortis, where I had to force myself to finish it. I felt myself flow through this quite easily. I felt that, like I said, I literally read this on the plane on the way home. That was it. That was all of the reading, and I was done with it. And well, yeah, it was a bit of a captive audience at that point because it didn't really have much else to do. Even so, I had attempted to read Trigger Mortis while on a plane for a different trip, and I ended up putting it down and playing games on my phone instead because I just couldn't keep myself in it. Whereas with Colonel Soon, I didn't have a problem reading it cover to cover in one sitting. Now, I'll spoil something for you here. Oh. Colonel Soon is my favorite of the 3 books we're going to be discussing. Fair enough. I can spoil me too. So, might see where this is going here. But, no, what we have is, it turns out that M is very, very sick. We don't know quite with what. It might just be a really, really crappy flu. But it sounds like it's something. I don't know. It sounds like it's something worse, because he's basically stuck at home. His very, very vulnerable, I can't believe there are no guards there home. I mean, even at this time, especially after... say a year ago in the timeline of this story, we had the Soviets successfully penetrate a British agent to try and kill him. But nope, he still won't have any guards at home. Nope. What? Really? I still despise the fact that they were able to successfully brainwash Bond at any point. I still just, I don't want to acknowledge that in any way, shape, or form. I hate acknowledging that. And by admitting that his security was lacking in order for them to be able to do this, because of that, I have to acknowledge that again happened. So I don't like to do that. But of course, we know it did happen. Yeah. And I agree with you. The scene actually plays very, very well. Up to that point, I wasn't ready to get into the book because
down and out Bond, who's basically just feeling sorry for himself.
Boring as hell.
Yes, he's not interesting. He's absolutely not interesting. And while eventually Kingsley Amis does pick up the Ian Fleming thing, it takes him a while to get going in terms of the Ian Fleming hook. Because one thing that Ian Fleming does for me in most cases that are not called The Spy Who Loved Me is to hook me in within the first 15 pages. Like, yeah, okay, no matter what's going on, I'm interested in reading this. It took a little bit longer with Colonel Sun. But once we get to this scene, I'm on board. This is interesting. Now, we got to jump a shark or two when it comes to Bond figuring out exactly where M has been taken when he's abducted. And the stupid thing is, we're told later on that they wanted to leave a deliberate trail so Bond could follow.
Well, and to be fair, Bond did even say, this may have been left as a deliberate trail for me to follow. Even though it was so out there and it took so many steps to get to that. The idea, of course, being that the bad guys were so good at being bad guys that they knew how to leave a trail that was just this side of believable of something that might be accidentally left behind. And that would take at least a little bit of work to figure out. They didn't just leave a post-it note saying, oh, here is where we went. You know, they did put a little bit of effort into hiding it while still the point being that they wanted him to end up there. And I'm sure...
Because let's face it, what is Bond going to figure out faster than anyone else? Oh, this is how you get a hold of a hooker. Because that's the evidence they leave behind.
I recognize this phone number. It appears on my phone bill 32 times a day. Yeah, basically. So on the one hand, yes, you do have to stretch your suspension of disbelief just a little bit. Okay, maybe a lot. But at least they did it in such a way as they were acknowledging that they were asking us to stretch that. I felt that they were, the bad guy was saying, okay, we want to leave a clue. It can't be too obvious that we left a clue, but we want to leave a clue. Okay, so that's the bad guy's plan. Leave a clue that's not too obvious, but that will lead Bond where they want him to go. And Bond, for his part, is not only able to figure out the clue, but also, with his Bondinosity, is able to get that sense that, you know what, maybe, just maybe, this clue was planted. So he's still just a bit smarter than the bad guys who we are supposed to believe are pretty damn smart. So on the one hand, it's kind of like, okay. On the other hand, it's like, I feel they put all the elements together to give it the Bondinosity that worked for me. So while I agree that it does take a little stretch to get there, I believe he did it in the right way.
I agree. And hey, if you're gonna have to jump some sharks in Bond, involve hookers. Okay, fine. I'm
if not actual sharks. I mean, I would have been happy with actual sharks being involved.
Of course.
As you know.
What about hooker sharks?
Ooh.
Yeah, we call this one Jaws.
Oh, no. Oh, you just ruined a perfectly good fantasy. What's wrong with you?
Oh, that was great. Anyway, so Bond, of course, figures out that we're going to an exotic locale, which the Bond novels really hadn't gone to, even though a story kind of did, but the novels hadn't, so we're going to Greece.
All right.
Yay! Yes, we're getting burgers. No, just kidding. We're going to Greece.
Oh, yeah.
And why are we going to Greece? Because it turns out there's this really awful plot, and someone wants to frame the British government, specifically frame James Bond and M as a way of revenge, for doing an awful thing. And our villain who is setting up this plot is, of course, no spoiler here because it's the title of the frickin' book, Colonel Sun, who is not an agent of SMERSH, but rather an agent of the Chinese government. Yes, that's right. It's time to bring in that yellow peril, which is exactly how M refers to him as, what was it, a yellow bastard? Maybe actually use the phrase yellow peril. I kind of remember that.
I know there was at least mention of yellow. I don't know. Now, to be fair, we're talking about how we kind of give Fleming a little bit of a pass on some of that crap because of the time in which this book was written. This book was still in the 60s.
It was.
Well, it was in the late 60s. It was 68, but it was early 68. So I'm still willing to give him just a little bit of a pass as far as the characters. Now, I'm not giving the author a pass for if he felt that way, then that's on him. But I'll give the characters a pass for feeling that way, especially characters who are supposed to be staunch patriots of their particular government. Of course, they're going to look at everything outside of their government as bad.
Yeah, and this is a case where we're only a couple years off the death of Ian Fleming. So this is where it doesn't feel like as much of a stretch to write like him. So I do give that a pass, but it is worthy of it is important to the story that Colonel Sun is not an agent of SMERSH. No, the agent of SMERSH, he happens to be a homosexual kind of pedophile because, we got to write like Ian Fleming. So obviously, if you're gay and especially into young men who might still be legally considered boys, then, obviously you have to be bad, and that is a symbol of you being bad, because if you are bad, then you have to have something like this in your character.
Right.
So that's our big hint that one of the Russian agents of SMERSH is in fact bad because he's gay. And, of course, because he's gay, he has to like young men and boys, because gay people can't possibly fall in love with men their own age.
Yeah. It's
right.
Again, that is a bit of a symptom of the time. This is the time period when people were starting to become more acceptant and to realize that, hey, wait a minute, it's not that big a deal. It's just a different gender choice. It doesn't mean they're a bad person. It doesn't mean they're into illegal things or into people who don't have the ability to make a choice for themselves. Not every gay person is a pederast. That's not the way it is. However, there was a time when people did believe that, and this is not too far removed from that time. I mean, it's easy to forget sometimes how far we've come as a society in relatively a short period of time. We're talking about 50 or so years here removed from this, and we still have people that honestly believe that. I mean, there are literally people in this country who think Donald Trump would be a good candidate for president. I can't explain how that could even be a legitimate thought process. So the fact is, for 68, I can kind of give them a pass for still having those thoughts. It's not good. It's not important to the story in any way, shape, or form.
And that's the part that I'm getting at, because I'm with you. It's the time that it is. It is what it is. But it's just, this felt like Kingsley Amis reaching for Fleming, because he's still reaching for Fleming. He freely acknowledges in his own afterword to the book that he didn't think he hit Fleming, but you can tell the parts where he tries.
I didn't
are
quite
parts
hit
like this.
Fleming, but you saw what I wrote about the gay guy, right? I mean, come on, I'm close.
Yeah, and we'll get more into his comments when we're done discussing the book. But, so what we have is Colonel Sun has kidnapped him, also wants to kidnap Bond so that he can take an action against the Russians and blame Bond and M for doing it. And he figures it'll be plausible because SMERSH has a vendetta on them and vice versa. And even though there are some people who will know better, because of the publicity mess, they'll have to act. And so trouble between the West and Russia, it can only be good for China as they clean up the pieces afterwards.
Right.
So that's what we got going on there.
Yeah, which isn't a completely implausible plot line, which I like. That's what I like in my blonde pots. We've talked about this before.
Your blonde pots?
My blonde pots, yes. My Bond plots. I also like my blonde pots. I like my redheaded plots too. Pots too, especially Pepper. But what I'm getting at, I like my evil, villainous plots in my Bond books and movies and storylines to be just on the cusp of insane. I want them to have just enough plausibility to make you think that an insane person could think it plausible. If it's way too insane, then you get to the point where it's like, okay, not even a crazy nut job could possibly think this is going to work. And if it's too boring, then you're just like, okay, well, why is this a Bond plot? I mean, this could be any random action hero.
He just wants to invade Korea. Come on.
Yeah. I really just want to get over this demilitarized. There's this minefield, right? Okay, so here's what I need to do. I need to get over the minefield. Yeah, I have hovercraft that somehow magically the downforce of my hovercraft don't set off the mines. Inexplicable. Whatever. But that's not enough. I need white people surgery and a giant laser beam from space.
As one does.
Exactly. That's where you lose me. When you get to the point where like, wait, what? Not even a crazy... You could walk into an asylum and present this to someone there and they'd be like, no, man, no. I like my plots to be just on the side of insane where a legitimately unhinged person would think, all right, that's all.
See,
that's what I'm asking for.
For me, I'm just a little off to the side from you here because this is one place where it kind of lost me. Not entirely, but disbelief was gone as far as suspension thereof. Because if they had just kidnapped or tried to lure in Bond to blame him, okay, I'm good with that. That makes sense. The moment you bring in M, why the bloody hell would M ever be in on a field operation? That makes no sense. I didn't like it in The World Is Not Enough, and I don't like it back here. It makes no sense. M is the boss in his office. That's like saying, you know what? Obama's going to lead an airstrike into Syria. Bullshit. No.
You don't think Barry could handle it?
I think Barry can handle it. It doesn't work that way.
No, I understand what you're saying there. I do. And for that part of it, again, I'm willing to suspend the disbelief just a little bit. I'm willing to think, okay, this guy is nutty enough, especially when we meet him and we're like, okay, wow, this guy's unhinged. Where he wants to get the highest member of the British government that he thinks he can get his hands on. And the fact that M is suffering from this illness, hey, the collapse got him down. He's accessible.
Wow. Are you sure that it was M and not Bond? No, wait.
Yeah, either way. So I'm willing to let that slide just on the fact that he doesn't know how the British government works exactly. So therefore his thought process is, I'm going to get the highest person I can. And the fact of the matter is, whether it makes sense or not for M to be in a field operation, the rest of the world isn't going to care. If they see evidence that this person was, and then they hear, oh, by the way, this person was also the head of the British Secret Service, they'll be like, well, Britain did something bad now, didn't they? We gotta do something about this. I'm willing to accept that because I am willing to acknowledge the stupidity of the rest of the world in most cases, because I've seen it, unfortunately, in real life. So I'm willing to let that part slide, even though I understand completely what you're saying.
Fair enough. And I let it slide for the purposes of reading, and this is a very short book. It's under 200 pages. You can do this in one sitting if you really want to.
Yeah.
I did it in two, just because, as I've mentioned in other book episodes, I read while I eat, and I didn't feel like staying at the table after I was done eating, so I read this over 2 meals.
Yeah.
But
and for me, it was one flight from MKE to PHX. Done.
There you go. But so it's an easy read, easy to go through, and even though I didn't agree with that part of the plot, I let it go. I actually had more of a problem with, I thought, the needless addition of the Smersh interference, because it could have added to the story. It honestly could have. But in the end, it's a waste of time, and it just seemed like a big excuse to get a pederast in here. And it just... I would have been better with that if I felt like it lent to the story, but I don't think it did.
I can somewhat agree with that. Like I said, I don't think it was necessarily an excuse to get a pederast into the story, although they did end up doing that.
No, but it just feels that way.
It was an excuse to get Smersh into the story. That's what it was. Because you have Bond, you're fresh off of Ian Fleming. People who are reading the Bond novels, they want Smersh involvement. But that wasn't the story here. So I would honestly not be surprised at all if the first draft of this novel came through without any Smersh involvement whatsoever. And some editor somewhere along the line said, you know what, if you want to get this published, we're going to at least have to have mention of Smersh to get people to pick up this book. We have to be able to at least say Smersh is in here in order for people to understand that this is a Bond novel. You know, if not in the editing process, then before even the writing process, when they handed it and said, guess what, you get to write the next Bond novel, but make sure you put this in. I would not be surprised at all if there was a conversation somewhere down the line that he was ultimately either required to or strongly encouraged to include a reference to Smersh at some point, just to have it there. And that's kind of what it felt like to me. Like it was an inclusion because it had to be there. But I think he did it better than Horowitz did, including Pussy Galore into Trigger Mortis.
Oh, I will definitely agree
so
there.
So while it was shoehorned in there, I think it was done better even than that. So I'm willing to accept the Smersh involvement. The pederast involvement is completely unnecessary. I agree with you there. That was just, again, I think that was just a product of the time and the somewhat general assumption among a lot of people at that point that was the way things were, because they didn't know any better.
For me, it felt more like this is where Amos is trying to reach for Fleming's style because he's not hitting it in some of the dialogue and some of the descriptions.
I could see that as well. I won't argue the point either way because honestly, it could flip of the coin, quite honestly.
And then two other things that jump out at me, particularly in hindsight, with one of them. There are two things here that end up showing up in James Bond movies later on, because we have James Bond getting involved with a different agent of Smersh, a woman, and of course they get along fabulously and work very well together. When did this happen later on in life? Just saying. So that was fine. Now, of course, because we're reaching for Fleming again, we had to have something, even though I'm glad this happened off camera, but the description afterward just, again, this is one where I shook my head and my jaw kind of dropped. The girl ends up, I don't think this is a spoiler here because it happens all the time, Bond and the girl get captured by the bad guy because it always happens. I mean, that's just,
because the one time Bond's guard is down is when his pants are also.
Yeah. And so the girl is punished by being sent into what's supposed to be a rape, specifically a three-way between her, another girl, and a guard. And she says, I just made sure it wasn't any fun for them, so they left me alone. Now, on the one hand, I'm glad she didn't get things as bad as they could have been, but just that, I just felt squicked at that.
It was completely unnecessary, yes. And again, it's one of those situations that I feel is, we talked about this when we talked about Quantum of Solace. It's unnecessary, as rape should never be used as just a way to be like, look how bad this bad guy is. And unfortunately, sometimes that's the way it's portrayed. It's like, okay, we really want to make sure people don't like this bad guy. So how can we do that? Oh, I know, we'll make him rape somebody. It's unnecessary. It's overused, and it's just absolutely wrong because it doesn't add anything to any of the characters. When it can be used in such a way where it really adds to the character development, then I wouldn't say I'm okay with it, but I'm okay with it being included in the story if it actually fits. If it's
like,
something...
for example, I would say the best example of that is the Charles Bronson movie Death Wish, where it's the entire basis for what happens to the character.
And more recently, even, I would say Jessica Jones, the Marvel Netflix series. I just finished watching that, and that does play a part in how bad the bad guy is, but it also, because just the way the character is done and the way the other characters, it is necessary for the plot, and it works, and it's not exploitive. It's really well done. I encourage anybody out there who has Netflix, check out Jessica Jones. Great series. It's only 13 episodes. Watch it. It's good. But it is a situation where you could look at it and be like, oh, they want to make sure we know the bad guy's bad, so we raped that. No, that's not the way it is in this one. Whereas in Colonel Soon, that's pretty much what we're expecting. You know, it's like, oh, look how bad this guy is.
Now, with that said, the character of Colonel Sun himself, I think, is definitely the most interesting of the three villains in these books. I thought about this afterwards because the main thing I got while reading the book is, wow, this guy is just so polite and friendly, and he's just the happy-go-lucky psycho killer next door. And then I thought about, like, you know what? If Joseph Wiseman's Dr. No just took some happy pills, this is what we would end up with right here. So we take what's supposed to be an Asian character, played by a Canadian. I think Joseph Wiseman was.
Sorry about that,
But we take what's supposed to be an Asian character and we just notch up his personality to make him a little happier, and we get Colonel Sun. And you know what? That worked for me. His character worked for me. His plot didn't always work for me, but his character did. And so I'm on board with that. In fact, it was the strength of the Colonel Sun character, even though he's not on the page as often as one might imagine, but realistically the villain rarely is. It's the strength of the Colonel Sun character that makes me say this book is going to be worth reading.
I would agree. I really did enjoy the character. Like I said, I actually, despite its faults, and it does have faults, I'm not denying that whatsoever. Despite its faults, I did find this to be an enjoyable read. This is one that I would recommend to someone who has... I wouldn't recommend this as like, oh, hey, you're just going to start reading Bond books? Okay, here's Colonel Sun, read this first. No, that wouldn't be the tact I would go.
No, you read all the Ian Fleming books except for Spy Who Loved Me, and then you read this.
Exactly. It would be one that I would definitely, it would be one that I wouldn't exclude only to the completists. We read a lot of things, we do a lot of things where we'd say, okay, only consume this if you absolutely have to say you've consumed everything. That's not the case in this one. I would say this is a worthwhile read if you are a fan of the genre, if you are a fan of the character. It's not the best example of any of these things, but I think it is a decent one. Like I said, I thought it was an enjoyable read. I enjoyed the book in total.
I will also add the caveat that, and if you enjoy the Ian Fleming Bond novels.
Yes.
Because I do think you have to have read at least a few of those first. And, just to get into the Bond of the books, because he's a totally different experience than the Bond of the movies. And then also to decide if you like this style. Because then if you do, even though Kingsley Amis takes the least effort to be Ian Fleming, I think the result is the best written of 3 books we're talking about.
For sure.
And apparently, writers of Spectre thought so too, because they completely stole the torture scene.
There were some slight differences I noticed. The whole bit about stealing his memory of faces. That was completely new. That was not in Colonel Sun.
That's because the science wasn't known at the time.
Yeah. But the whole point of he's going to die not knowing who you are. That part of the torture where he was torturing not only the person in the actual chair being tortured, but the person observing the torture as well. That part didn't exist in the book. And again, like you said, the science wasn't there. There was no knowledge of the fact that, hey, there are people out there who actually don't remember faces. Like, that's an actual thing that can happen to you. But other than that, I mean, the whole thing of you live inside your head, and the whole bit about, with a slight change, because in Spectre, he's like, James and I were recently present when someone lost their eyes. Instead, it was just, I was recently present when someone lost their eyes, because in this situation, Bond had not been in any situation with Colonel Sun. But other than that, it was, again, like I said, word for word. It was amazing. And I actually, maybe it was because I saw Spectre first and then read Colonel Sun. Maybe that's what tempered my vision of it. Because I thoroughly enjoyed this scene as again, it's a bad guy doing bad things. But it was, for me, it was the best written torture scene I had read since Casino Royale.
The one thing that throws me there, and full disclosure, I think the version of the scene in Spectre is better.
True. I will agree.
I think it is helped specifically, not only by the presence of Madeline and the fact that the person doing the torture is of a far greater significance than Colonel Sun.
True.
But also it benefits from the technology, because the torture as written in Colonel Sun, I did not believe. And the reason why is he's talking about sticking a very long, basically ice pick into Bond's ear. I'm sorry, Bond is not going to effing recover from that in the way that he does in the book. He's not going to be able to hear. He's not going to be able to balance. He's going to be
messed up
for months.
Pretty bad. Yeah. It is possible to recover from a ruptured eardrum. It does take some time, and it's not going to be something that you can get over instantly.
Yeah. Whereas the precision probing done with the machine and Spectre, much more believable. But I just couldn't buy that Bond recovered so easily from what Colonel Sun is explicitly said to have done to him.
Yeah.
With that said,
again, you have to kind of, at that point, you have to chalk it up to, okay, Bond's such a badass that, and yeah, you do have to suspend disbelief for that part of it.
Yeah,
but
so,
that is not the torture scene itself. That's the aftermath of. That's what happens after the torture scene. So I don't count that necessarily when I'm ranking or, when I'm judging the actual torture scene itself.
I'll say it did not tear me out of the story nearly as much as Pussy Galore getting painted.
Exactly.
And where this leaves us
so
in the
unnecessary.
end is that while Colonel Sun has its faults, as long as you're good on the Ian Fleming era books, then it is worth your time. And thanks to the advent of ebooks, it is much easier to find than it used to be.
Yes, I do know that at one point this was a book that was almost non-existent. It was very, very difficult to find, but now it is available in ebook format. You can get it on Amazon, you can get it on Barnes & Noble, you can find it just about anywhere, and in fact, you can even get paperback copies of it on Amazon, I believe, for very, very inexpensive prices.
Yeah, there was a reprint in 91, which disappeared relatively quickly, but you can still find that on Amazon if you want. And that is also the source of the commentary from Kingsley Amos that came with the ebook version that I got. Oh. And one thing that really struck me, and this is a tone I get from almost every one of the authors who has written a Bond sequel after Ian Fleming. But Kingsley Amos is very explicit. He has no respect for the movies. He doesn't like them. He just does not like them at all. He doesn't like what they've done to the character. He's not a fan. And I understand, okay, you're a writer. You prefer the one format, but just the blatant disrespect kind of threw me.
Oh. I'm gonna have to hunt that down and check it out, because that I did not have on my version, so I'm gonna have to check that out. I'm very interested to read that.
Yeah, it's something that I kind of pick up on from a lot of these authors. So I think basically the only one that I can think of who's had commentary, and extensive commentary at that, considering he's made a living out of it, is Raymond Benson, who of course is a Bond fan extraordinaire. So of course he's not going to do that.
Yeah, well, because he commentates on not only the movies but the other authors' books as well. So yeah, he's definitely going to have his opinion on the subjects.
Messing up Mr. Benson's title still is one of my greatest regrets for flubs that I've ever done during an episode. I kind of want to burn that episode. But anyway, so Kingsley Amos or Mr. Markham, however you want to call him, Colonel Sun, if you're going to read a Bond sequel written by another author, this is the one to pick up.
I agree. I definitely, I even hold it a little bit higher esteem, it seems, than you do. Definitely out of these three, and we haven't even talked about the third one yet, but we will in a moment. Definitely better than Trigger Mortis. Again, I haven't read anything else by Anthony Horowitz, so I don't know if this was a symptom of him trying to write like Fleming, or if that's just how he writes. I will definitely, I'm going to make it a point to get one or two more Anthony Horowitz books specifically, and read them, and report back on a future episode. Just as, something in the opening or something like that. I'll just be like, hey, by the way, I read this, and hey, guess what? This is the case, or this isn't the case. But I would like to think, because the potential was there, I just think maybe he was reaching for Fleming a little bit too much. But with Colonel Sun, I keep wanting to say Sun because that's how I've read it in my head forever, because it's spelled S-U-N. So I'm just like, oh, Colonel Sun, okay. With Colonel Sun, I think this was a good, solid effort to channel Fleming in the better ways. Yes, it did have some of his flaws as well, but I think with the plot in general and the details, everything kind of melded together to be a better read than Trigger Mortis, definitely, and then Devil May Care, which we'll talk about in a moment. But like I said, this isn't the first thing I'd point people to, but it's definitely not one that I would tell people to avoid either. If they're into the Fleming Bond, if they're into reading the books, I'd be like, yeah, definitely check this one out as well.
All right. Now that brings us to our next direct sequel to The Man with the Golden Gun, which does not acknowledge the existence of Colonel Sun at all.
Of course not.
And that is the just recently mentioned Devil May Care by Sebastian Faulks, who is officially credited on the title as Sebastian Faulks writing as Ian Fleming. So, yeah, we know you're going to be trying to write in the style of Ian Fleming. The moment you say, I'm writing as Ian Fleming, you're stretching it, you're overselling it. Come on, you sound like an Amway salesman now.
Yeah, it does.
That's just not good.
It does reek of overselling. It's like, okay, it is a James Bond novel. We know this. The fact that he is... It's one of two things. It's either overselling or it's trying to disassociate from his other works. It's either, okay, look at this. I'm trying to write as Ian Fleming. Ignore my other stuff because that's not the style I want you to think of. Or it's like, if you're looking at all my other stuff, ignore this one because I was trying to write as somebody else. So don't judge my other stuff by this one. I'd like to think it's that one. I honestly don't
think he's thinking that far. I think he's trying to sell books.
Well, yeah. Agreed. This one, again, I almost want... The plot of this one, again, is actually decent for what a Bond universe plot is. It's just this side of plausible. It's just crazy enough that, hey, if you're insane, you might think it would work. So I'm okay with that part. The execution, is lacking again. We're back to the trying desperately to write as Ian Fleming, and I think that's the fact that he even credits himself as writing as Ian Fleming speaks to how this was written. And again, I don't believe I've read any of Sebastian Faulks novels either, so I could be wrong there. This could just be his style, but again, we end up with what I feel is kind of a subpar sequel to a Fleming novel.
Well, I'll put this in a couple of phrases. One, I can't believe I've read this book twice. Because I have the original print hardcover. I got it the day it came out, read it then, and I read it again for this episode. Can't believe I read it twice. Because, honestly, this book sucks. I mean, I do not like this book at all. And I say that both as a just reader at large and as a Bond fan. Because ultimately what I want to see is a book that brings me back into the Bond universe. And I would recommend reading Trigger Mortis twice before reading this once.
Ooh. Now, see, I don't know if I can go that far, but I will agree with you. I, too, read this twice. Well, technically read this twice. I listened to this once in audiobook format when I was doing a job where I was literally standing around for several hours a day. And I listened to the audiobook version of this over a couple of days. And then I reread it in print form for this episode to refresh. And I, too, cannot believe that I have consumed this book twice. But, if I had to weigh it against Trigger Mortis, I don't know that I could point to one or the other and say this one is worse than this one, because I thought they were equally bad.
I mean, I can only think out of the standalone James Bond novels written by other people, and I'm being very specific out of the standalone ones, so where it was just a one and done. I can only think of one that might be as bad as this one. And at this point, I'm leaning toward this one, but I'd have to read the other one again because I know I didn't like that one either. And let's face it, we're going to be forced to read it. So, Mr. Deaver, we're coming for you. Just saying. But...
Oh, really?
All
right. Okay. I know what you're talking about now, and I read that one, and okay. All right. When we talk about that, we might have some difference of opinion there. I will need to reread to be sure, but all right.
And I will too. I will give it its fair shake, but based on what I remember my first impression being, either way, Devil May Care, it lives in the basement and it carries the smell. So if I'm going to recommend any of the standalone Bond novels above all of the others, it's one we talked about already in a different episode. Solo by William Boyd is the one I'm going to recommend more than any of the others.
Yeah, I could agree with that thus far of everything we've spoken about. There are still some books out there that I haven't read yet. We haven't gotten to them on the show, so there are some that I have read that we haven't talked about yet, and then there are some that I just have not read yet. So we'll get there.
Yeah. But as far as the one we're discussing now, Devil May Care, I think the best thing about it was something I didn't even know existed until we did our theme songs redux. And that would be the theme song, which actually doesn't sound like it belongs with this book, and I can only count that as a good thing.
I was about to say the best thing about this book is the fact that they did a theme song competition, and we ended up getting a great song that had some good bondinosity in and of itself, even though the book itself really didn't have that going on for it. I would agree. I was going to mention that, as a matter of fact. If you haven't listened, go back and check out the episode Theme Songs Redux. We talk about we redo our list of theme songs, and we include some wild cards, and there just may be a special Devil May Care surprise in there for you, which we actually play. Since it's a song that's not officially licensed by anybody, we could actually play it on the episode. So go give that a listen. It's pretty cool.
Now, as far as the story here, this again is a direct sequel to The Man with the Golden Gun. And we once again start out with down and out James Bond thinking about retirement because he doesn't think he has it in him. In fact, how does he know for sure?
Is that just a note that's handed to authors before they write a James Bond book? It's like, hey, here's just a starting point that other people have found works. Maybe you should try it.
Not all of them do it, but yeah, this one definitely goes to that well. And so we have Bond taking himself a holiday around Europe, after which he plans to resign as soon as he gets back to Britain. And you know what tears it for him? When he meets a girl, they get along famously, she wants to take him to bed, and he says goodnight at the door. Oh no, Bond doesn't want to seduce a woman.
Performance anxiety?
He needs Cialis.
Maybe that sweet tang of rape. I don't know. Maybe that's what he's looking for.
Maybe. But yeah, that's how he decides he doesn't have it anymore. Now, how the woman is initially introduced, what did you think of that?
Meh. That's really, I think, the best I can give it.
Did you like her at all?
I didn't dislike her specifically. There wasn't any particular animosity towards her. Again, the best I can give her is meh.
You are so much more charitable than I am. And I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, because I love James Bond, but that is exactly why I'm being such a downer on this book, because it murders my guy's legacy, man. I mean, I hate this character. I think she's terrible. I think she's written very badly.
And she gets worse the further you get into the book.
Yes, exactly. Her quote-unquote twist is so effing predictable. Both of her twists are so predictable from the moment
Even the part where they specifically point out that there's this one thing that Bond noticed that would make it totally impossible for this twist to... But wait, it does. No, it's still... The fact that he points it out makes it even more obvious that that's what the twist is going to be.
Yes, I mean, it's so obvious from the very beginning. It's just stupid. And then the moment you hear M say that he's going to get this other thing, well, other twist revealed right away. I mean, just so obvious, just so transparently badly written. I mean, no, your writing is Ian Fleming, you claim, but Fleming was better than this.
Yeah.
At the very least, even at his most predictable, which he could be, Fleming was better than this.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. Yeah, you have, like I said, the basic plot here between, not the plot of the book, but the evil plot, the villainous plot of the bad guy, has just enough bondinosity to get me on board. You know, I'm like, okay, I see where he's going with this. I see where he's at, and yes, it does take a stretch to get there, but again, it's that stretch that if you presented this plot to an insane person, they would be like, okay, that's right where I like my Bond plots. I'm okay with that part. The execution is bad.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. The plot has potential. The villainous plot could work if the execution was there at all. But the execution got executed before it showed up. It's terrible. I mean, all this villain is his deformity.
Yeah.
Hey, we're borrowing from the worst of Fleming again. I mean, this villain has what's called a monkey's paw. He has a deformed hand. It's big. It's hairy. Oh, no. So therefore, he must hate all of England because... And they give a convoluted explanation of why he hates England. And then we found out that someone made it all up. So no one knows why he actually hates England. He's just a dick.
To be fair, something we didn't mention in Colonel Soon, they did that part right in Colonel Soon. Yes. They gave him a good reason to hate England. compared it to 006's reasons for hating England in GoldenEye in the film.
Yeah, it's perfectly
was
reasonable.
Plausible enough to make you think, okay, this guy's nuts, but he believes this. In Colonel Soon, the same thing. Okay, this guy's nuts, but he believes this.
And there is a very strong history of animosity between Britain and China. I totally buy it.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Devil May Care? No. It doesn't work.
No, it makes no sense whatsoever. And it makes less sense when they say, oh, that bullshit we told you before was bullshit.
You're like, wait, what? I was almost ready to swallow that crap. And then you take it back and you don't give me anything to replace it.
And the character himself. So he's this parody of good English manners, not cricket. What? And of course he cheats at games because, we have to, because we're writing as Ian Fleming now.
Exactly. And again, that felt, while at the core, I was like, okay, we've got a Bond villain who so desperately wants to win, not only at his particular grand plot, but also at every little thing in between, including even something as small as a tennis match. He wants to win so bad, he wants to cheat. Okay, I'm willing to go along with this. In so much as the parts where he was like, oh, that was out. When Bond is like, no, it was clearly in. I can see the mark on the clay that indicates that was in. But the bad guys say, no, it was out. Okay, I'm willing to go that far. The stretch is the fact that, I have to have this court because this court has been set up because I've got a cable going down to the net down below where my henchman is controlling the height of the net to make sure that my serves go over and your serves fault. The extent of the convolution is so extreme that it makes it goes past that plausibility point,
Plus, while that scene is not as long as the golf scene in Goldfinger.
Thankfully.
Doesn't it feel like it for a while?
It really kind of does. You do get that sense that, okay, are they still playing right now? Like,
Okay, I get it. He's saying that it was out when it was in for the 7th time. Yeah. Can we please? Oh, for fuck.
So this is the thing he does. This is the thing he does. I get it. Okay, moving on.
Somebody drop the bar of Nazi gold. Just do something.
I did. Jesus. I will say that I did appreciate the ending of that scene, and not just because it was finally over. That part was good too.
That was the best part.
But I did appreciate that the girl went and figured out what was going on and turned the tables, because it was kind of the opposite of what happened in the Goldfinger film, where Bond finds out what's going on and makes the girl turn the tables. It was kind of it kind of had that feeling, that one moment when you kind of realized, and it was, again, supposed to be a surprise, but we all knew what was happening when, Bond's all of a sudden winning. Okay, so whatever method he was using to cheat is somehow backfiring on him now. It was blatantly obvious before it was explained to us.
And you also kind of knew what it was going to be because they explained the mechanics of what the cheating mechanism will be. It's the only part of the tennis court they explain the mechanics of. Yeah. Therefore.
Yeah, you knew what was going on and you knew what was happening, and yet it was still a kind of fun reveal when she goes, oh, well, by the way, this is why, blah, blah, blah,
It was her best scene.
Yeah, exactly. It really was. So that part, I wouldn't say it makes the entire scene worth it, but it at least ends that scene on a high note. So you do have that, at least.
But then beyond that, okay, we have our introduction to the character. We know he's deformed. We know he cheats. Yay, yay, yay. There's nothing to this villain. This villain is the most useless villain. He does nothing.
He's a drug dealer. That's basically his shtick. Yeah,
It's not even that he's a drug dealer. It's that he literally does nothing. Everything that happens in the novel could have happened without him. He didn't need to be there. And it's proven he didn't need to be there because the climax happens well before the book ends and well before we actually deal with the villain or the henchman. We'd had the climax of the book already. And why the villain and the henchman show up afterwards is stupid. It's just like, there was no point to these people. None. I felt like the entire experience was a waste of my time. Twice.
I can definitely agree. It really felt forced. And like I said, it's just the villain was shoehorned in there. And that's even worse than, in Trigger Mortis, they shoehorned in Pussy Galore. Okay, yeah. But that's a side character that they shoehorned in to make us think that this was attached to Goldfinger. Okay. Yeah, it was unnecessary, but I understand. In this one, it almost feels like they shoehorned the main villain in for no other reason than to have a main villain with a deformity who could be the focal point, because everything else was superfluous to his story. He didn't need to be there. He didn't need to exist.
Yeah, and of course, just because he's really, really bad, he has to threaten to have the girl raped by 100 people before killing her.
Yeah. Again, we have this trope where it's like, okay, well, just in case you didn't know he was bad to begin with. Yes, okay, we've already told you that he's literally enslaved people with drugs. He's literally made addicts out of people and then forced them to work for nothing more than food and drugs. Okay, we get it. He's bad. Oh, but every once in a while he drags a woman in there to show off and eventually be gang raped by all of his slaves. Just in case we didn't already hate the guy. We get it. He's a bad guy. That part was totally unnecessary.
As was the other trope for Ian Fleming wannabes that we have to always have in there. Let's throw in a gay guy who obviously can't be trusted. And boy, we are going to go out of our way to tell you how gay he is. He's Carmen because he's into Carmen.
Oh, Jesus. I almost forgot about that guy. Now, here's the thing. We were willing to forgive this a little bit in Colonel Soon because of the time frame that it was written, 68. This came out in 2008. There's no excuse for this. This was bullshit.
And the character was totally unnecessary.
Oh, absolutely.
That side plot was unnecessary. Come to think of it, this book could have been 100 pages long and been about too long.
I agree completely. This, besides the base plot, like I would love to see somebody come through and take this base plot and redo it.
And I would also like to see it, because this is the other one good thing it has going for it, because it is something that is totally on the mark for a Bond location. In fact, it was supposed to be Once Upon a Time, but didn't quite happen. But in the modern world, we now have generations who don't even realize this ever existed. Pre-Islamic Revolution Iran. So when it was a very westernized country and very much more liberated than anything we think of the Islamic world today. And so that's a great setting. That's very interesting. And I would love to see someone tell a good story in it.
It would be nice. But yeah, this, again, this is one of those books that we would only, me personally, I'm speaking for myself, of course, although I doubt you'll disagree at this point. I would only recommend this book to Bond completists such as ourselves. Those who want to be able to say they've consumed everything in the Bond universe. Unfortunately, this is one of those things that exists in the Bond universe. If you want to consume it all, you have to take this into.
I thought of something else that I can pretty much set this on a bar with as far as how much I enjoyed reading it.
The Courtship of Princess Leia?
Oh, God, no. Why? Because I finished this book twice. I only got 30 pages into that one once.
Oh, that one was not good. Oh, man.
No, I was thinking more
I finished it, but, oh, man.
I'm thinking The Adventures of 003 and a half.
Oh, God. That at least you could coat with the, okay, imagine I'm 12 and reading this. My brain isn't fully developed.
See, I can't.
I'm kind of stupid.
I had already read and completely understood 4 Tolkien novels by then. I can't say that.
I'm just trying to paint the picture, okay? Yeah, this, it's rough. And in the points where he could have made up ground, he doesn't. You know, we have this predictable twist. We have these sisters, these twin sisters, who are identical except for 1 or 2 small differences. Although we never see the 2 of them in the same place at the same time. Oh.
It's like Donna Summer and Rick James. You never see them in the same place at the same time.
It's, even though they take an extra special effort to try to throw you off that twist.
I mean,
it still comes off so blatantly that you're like, come on. Like, if they hadn't done that, if they'd have left out the eye color completely, if they'd have ignored that, if they'd have just not said that, if they'd have just left the birthmark, if they'd have just done the birthmark, I would have been less suspicious and maybe been a slightly bit more surprised by the twist.
The thing is, the
fact that they pointed out the eye color like 5 times, I was like, all right.
I thought the fact that they point out the birthmark even once, because the first thing I thought was makeup.
Yeah. If they'd have done, I'll be fair to say, if they had just done one or the other. The fact that they did both and harped
the birthmark,
on them,
I would have figured it out right away. The eye color, mention it no more than twice, and maybe third time,
The problem for me is that maybe it's just that I know how identical twins work. And eye color is a major genetic trait. If you're an identical twin, you will have the same eye color. Birthmarks, on the other hand, can be formed in utero and can, in theory, be different. So I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt more on a birthmark than I am on this eye color situation.
See, for me, I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt on that the author doesn't know science.
Well, that becomes painfully obvious as the book progresses, but that's not really where we're going.
Except when it comes to body gold paint, because at that point, nope, all bets are off.
At least nobody got painted gold in this film. That's the only thing you can, or in this book. Whatever. It's, yeah.
Devil may care.
It's, like I said, the basic plot. Okay, you've got this villain who wants to destroy England. And how he's going to do it, he's gained control of basically all of the opiates going into England. Not just the illegal ones, but the legal ones too. He's managed to get control basically of every type of opiate. So we're talking, Percocets, Vicodins, the legitimate
Tylenol.
Morphine. Well, Tylenol isn't an opiate by itself, but Tylenol 3.
But he also said he has a regular analgesic factory.
Yeah, so he's got
normal
legitimate
over-the-counter drugs.
So he's got the legitimate thing going, and he has control of course, the underground, the actual heroin and stuff like that going on.
And
he's going to
totally
flood
buy
the
that,
market.
and I totally buy where his funding comes from because, again, there's historical basis for that.
Yeah. The base plotting. Okay, so this guy wants to take out England, and the way he's going to do it is by flooding the market with free or cheap opiates and turn everybody into addicts.
But then
basically
he
destroying
that's going to
the
take
country.
too long.
No, that was his. Originally, he was going to do something else, and then he decided that turning everybody into addicts was quicker. And then he was like, screw all that. I'm going to blow some shit up.
Because, devil may care.
Yeah, I think originally, first he was thinking economic, and then he's like, okay, no, I'll just turn everybody into addicts. And he's like, you know what, this is taking too long too, so I'm just going to blow some stuff up.
I'm just going to turn everybody to ash.
Yeah, let's just blow some stuff up. And again, it's one of the situations, again, and a very Bond-like plot. I'm going to blow some stuff up, but I'm going to frame another country for doing it so that we start a war, and I only have to blow one thing up, and then they'll blow each other up after that. Okay, I'm on board with that because that's a Bond-like plot. I get it. That's cool.
If only the villain showed up for it.
Right? Yeah, just
Yeah, so realistically, bad book.
It really is. Yeah. I would say the best thing about this book is the fact that the publishers, before they did this was published in 2008. This was the heyday of MySpace. And the publishers ran a contest on their MySpace page for a theme song for this book. They had over 500 entrants. 500 different bands or groups entered songs into this competition, and one was selected as the winner, a band called SAL or Sal. I don't know if they go by Sal or SAL, quite honestly. But they won the contest. They put out a great song, and it was a good song. I really enjoyed the song. That's the best part about this book, is the fact that a decent song came out of it.
Yeah, and honestly, I kind of feel bad for our listeners in a way, because when we originally came up with which 3 books we were going to pick, this is when Trigger Mortis, because, folks, let you in on a little secret, we planned this episode a long time ago. It's like always seems to happen whenever Eric and I plan a book episode. We end up recording it about 2-3 months after we intended to record it in the first place.
Yeah.
Now, I know you've been hearing episodes on a regular schedule for a long time now, and we're glad of that, but let's just say this episode missed getting recorded a few times. So we originally planned this to come out shortly after Trigger Mortis was released.
Yeah.
We planned planned this episode before it was released, so we were hoping it would be a good book. So I'm sorry. I wanted to at least give you some positivity here, but it's kind of hard. So most positive you get out of this episode is Colonel Soon.
And you know what? And like I said, I guess I have a little bit higher opinion of it than you do, but I would say Colonel Soon is definitely worth reading. Again, not the first one I'd recommend. Definitely read the actual Fleming novels first, but I would definitely say go ahead and read Colonel Soon. Devil May Care and Trigger Mortis, on the other hand, I would say, again, only for the completists out there. Only for those who want to be able to say, I have consumed everything Bond. If you don't have that desire, those aren't worth it. If you absolutely have to read one of them, read Trigger Mortis.
I will agree there too. And I'll just say that it's only because I have such a deeply ingrained love of books and a feeling that I need to own them that Devil May Care was still on my shelf to read a second time rather than having been donated to a library. Because all my Bond books will always be all my Bond books. So I will always have these books as long as I have space for them. But if I were the sort to cycle through my collections every so often, Devil May Care would not be here anymore. Yeah. So, now with that said, if you have read any of these books and would like to question our judgment or agree with us or something else on that order, or just let us know what you think of the show in general, or have an idea of something you want us to do, we are really easy to contact. You can find us on the web at hermajestiespod.com. You can click on this episode and leave us a note in the comments section. You can also find us on facebook.com/hermajestiespod because we make these really easy for you.
Oh, yeah.
You can also tweet us at hermajestiespod. You can tweet me directly at cinemaotr. You can also email me directly at ziggy@cinemaontherocks.com.
You can email me directly, Eric at foureyedradio.com or Eric at hermajestiespod.com, whichever's easier for you. And tweet at me at Eric J. Dewey. And definitely let us know if you've read any of these three books and you agree or disagree with our assessment of these novels. Please let us know. We'd love to know if you feel we missed something or if you feel we hit something on the nose and you just want to be like, yeah, I felt that. We want to hear from you. We love feedback. We love hearing from you, good or bad. Drop us a message, shoot us an email, tweet us, Facebook message us, whatever you want to do. We love to hear from you. We absolutely love it. We're glad to be there for anybody who listens. We want to try to be accessible. We're not just these faceless people out in the world. We want to interact. So, Bond fans unite.
Yes, and of course, we'd also like to say one more time to all of our fans all around the world, Happy New Year!
Happy New Year!
Yay!
I don't have an actual blower thing, so you get a sound effect.
kazoos and vuvuzelas probably wouldn't sound really good over these mics anyway. But any final thoughts before we go?
Hey, keep on reading, even if the book isn't great. I think a bad book is still more worthwhile of your time than a lot of other things out there. You may leave it feeling, did I really just read that? But at the same time, I still feel it's a worthwhile effort to go through. I think a lot of times people, especially in this day and age with so many TV shows, so many movies out there, so many other visual mediums, I think books get put to the side far too often. And reading is fundamental, folks. Okay.
It is. And if the thousands and thousands of words are too much for you and you need some pictures, fine, read a comic book. Yep. Those are fine too. There's nothing wrong with them. They still tell good stories. There's actually some awesome storytelling in a lot of the modern comic books. Oh, it's not like back in the 1930s when everything was just biff, bam, pow, I'll get you, you dirty rat. No, there's some really great storytelling in comic books and graphic novels now. So if the words are too much, or if you have some trouble reading, because I understand there are some people with some challenges when it comes to reading for long lengths of time.
Absolutely.
Even if you need to take it slow, it's worth reading. Unless it's Gravity's Rainbow, because that book is just too damn long to waste your time on, because it just sucks.
I would highly recommend people to check out audiobooks as well. People who maybe don't like necessarily to sit down and read, Audiobooks are a great way to still get that story without the actual reading necessarily. And sometimes there are situations where you have the ability to listen but don't have the ability to hold a book in your hand and look at it. Maybe you have to have your visual attention somewhere else but not really all of your brain attention. Audiobooks are fantastic for that, and there are so many that are available out there for either very cheap or even free if you just go looking for them. And I'm not even talking about those alternative sources you can find on the web. I'm talking about legitimate, legal, free audiobooks that are available. There's services like Scribd that offer audiobooks for a monthly subscription fee for unlimited. And
there's a subscription service on Amazon for audiobooks as well.
Yeah. So there's ways out there that you can consume these books without necessarily having to purchase actual physical copies. And don't let it ever be said that a library card is not a worthwhile investment. It's free. You just got to go to the library and pick out a book. I have found so many great books that I never would have even thought to take a look at because I just happened to check out the shelf at the library and be like, hey, this looks interesting. And since I can literally take it home for free for a few days to check it out, why not? So support your local libraries. Go get a library card. Go read a few books. Bond novels or not, just go read.
Yeah, and even if you're at the bookstore, the cheap shelf doesn't always mean the books suck. Sometimes it just means they're overstocked or going out of print. You can find some great stuff on the cheap shelf. In fact, I have a lot of my Ian Fleming Bond collection in hardcover because there was a collector's edition that ended up on the cheap shelf. And I got them for bargain basement prices, brand new. You'll never know what you'll find. And like I said, if you have some trouble reading, I have relatives with dyslexia. And audiobooks are just amazing for them because suddenly you have people who could not make their way through anything longer than a magazine article who are voracious listeners of books because now they have a format that they can consume. So, like Eric said, reading's fundamental. So there's our public service message, folks.
Now you know. And knowing is approximately 50% of the battle if G.I. Joe has taught me anything.
Indeed. And then what has James Bond Jr. taught us? That no one can stop you, but scum always tries. Dun, 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 dun. But anyway, that's going to do it for this episode of Her Majesty's Secret Podcast. I'm Ziggy Berkeley.
And I'm Eric Dewey.
And you have been listening to Her Majesty's Secret Podcast, only on The Fern.